guys, this is Eliza and welcome back to another video. So today I am filming my worst / most disappointing books of 2019. So luckily this list is a lot shorter than my best books of 2019. There's only 7 books on this list and this doesn't include any books that I DNF'd. There will be a separate video coming for them. There wasn't too many this year, but I will do a separate video for the books that I DNF'd and explaining why. So let's just jump straight into this video. So the first book I want to talk about is The Mistletoe Murders and Other Stories by P.D. James. This one I bought at a secondhand store because it looked really interesting. I love mysteries and it was being compared to Agatha Christie and this was basically awful. It was so boring, it was so freaking predictable, which is the opposite of what you want from a mystery. Like on a mystery you want it to be unpredictable and interesting and you just want to be hooked the entire time and you just want to know what happens. Wasn't the case. There were short stories. The first one wasn't, I think it was the first one or maybe the second one, I can't remember, but the second one maybe wasn't too bad, but the other one was, and the author within her writing kept referring to Agatha Christie. Like this mystery that they're trying to solve is worthy of Agatha Christie. No, they weren't, because they were extremely well, like really badly written. I love Agatha Christie, and the fact that they were comparing these mysteries to Agatha Christie mysteries, and it was just boring and it was predictable, and I was just like, nope. So yeah, I had higher expectations for this one and it just did not live up to it whatsoever. Next book we have is Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. This one, again, I didn't have high expectations for because I actually had relatively low expectations for this book, really, because I didn't read this right on release and I'd heard mixed reviews about it, so I went into it kind of like, and the only reason I finished this was because it was the book of the month for the YA book nerds and we needed to discuss it, so I needed to write discussion questions, which we're no longer doing books of the month because there was just low interaction, and most of the time, even though it was books I was keen for, majority of the time they ended up books I hated, and I was just like, how do I write questions when I really don't care? But anyways, so that stopped, but this was a book, YA book nerds book of the month at the time. Hey guys, so I feel like I've brushed over this book kind of and didn't really explain why I didn't like it. Obviously it was a disappointment. For the most part, my main issue was just a lack of everything. Like there was a lack of world building, nothing was explained. The book was really fast paced, but that meant there was no time to slow down and build the world and build the characters and let the characters develop and everything like that. So it felt very lacking in the character development, the world building, information on the magic system. None of that was ever really explained. So it felt very flat, one-dimensional, and I feel like there was never a big ending. You know how like in most YA books, like you've got this building and then there's this massive plot point at the end and it's like boom, and then everything is resolved, and you know, well, not always necessarily resolved, but you know, things fall into place and boom, we're at the end of the book. But there was never this big thing at the end. It was just kind of little bits and then it was like, oh, the book's over. Okay, was that it? What? And the main character, well, it follows 2 points of view. It follows Seraphim and Nadia, and Nadia was built up to be this chosen one type character, but then in the end she never actually did anything. Like it was just like, oh, is that it? Cool, right? The main character that I did like was Seraphim. He was interesting. He had a little bit more depth than the other characters, but still not a ton. So I'd be curious to see what happens with him in the next story. But for the most part, I just don't care because it was just so bland. And also I know an issue that some people had with, which I did mention in my review, but I'm not a romance reader, so I didn't particularly care. But this book was like highly advertised as like a villain romance, and it really wasn't. And I'll put a timestamp in case you want to skip ahead if you don't want spoilers. But for the main part, the villain romance, like, she got in within this group and she was friendly with them. Like the other half of the romance, he was a little bit questionable, but he was never like a villain. And she like fell for him and there was this romance bit, and then at the end he betrays her and blah blah blah. Like it wasn't really a villain romance. It was more just like a romance between two characters who didn't know each other previously, and you didn't know their background or anything, and they were a bit, you know, I don't know what's going on here, but there was a romance, and then one character turned out to be an arsehole. So, you know, I don't really see where this villain romance comes in. But anyways, back to the video. Yeah, this one was just disappointing for me. This wasn't like a worst book, this wasn't horrible, but it was definitely disappointing when I was super keen for it. The premise sounded really interesting and I really was keen to go into it, but it just a no. And especially this freaking synopsis. This was the main reason I was so keen to get into it. Let me just read this freaking synopsis. You've probably read it if you've heard this book, but some stories are so beautiful, so brutal, and they claw at your heart and refuse to let go. Welcome to the world of Wicked Saints, an epic, passionate novel that you won't soon forget. Prepare to meet a girl named Nadia who hears the whispers of the gods inside her head, a prince surrounded by desperate suitors and a deadly assassin, a monster hidden behind pale, tortured eyes and a smile that cuts like a knife. The paths of these three characters become entwined during the centuries-long war filled with sinners and saints, magic and mystery, and the star-crossed romance that threatens to tip the scales between dark and light forever. That sounds freaking incredible. This did not live up to that at all. So yeah, this one was definitely disappointing to me. Next, moving on to probably the most disappointing book I read this year, and that was Immunity by Erin Bowman. You may know Contagion made it to my best books of 2019, which should be out now, and I will leave a link down below. But I absolutely loved Contagion. I'll also link the reading vlog which I read Contagion in. I read it in 24 hours. I read it in 2 sittings. I had a snack in between and that was about it. But I devoured that book. It was amazing. It is a YA sci-fi horror and it is just incredible. You're on the edge of your seat the entire time. You just can't put it down because you need to know what happens next. And this one did not live up to that whatsoever. This basically, the horror aspect is gone in this book. It is just a sci-fi, which I have nothing against sci-fi, but when you come from that horror, sci-fi, creepy, you have no idea what's happening setting, and then come to this, it was just like, oh, okay. And this one was predictable. I'm pretty sure I reviewed this, so I'll leave it linked down below, but it just didn't live up to the first book. Like, if I'd read this as a standalone, I probably wouldn't have liked it even then because it just wasn't that good, but it would have been better rather than coming from Contagion and then going to this. So I highly recommend Contagion. It concludes well enough, as I said in my best books of 2019 video, it concludes well enough on its own. Like, it's not perfect, but I'd highly recommend just reading Contagion and ending on that note rather than reading this and being disappointed and just no. So yeah, this one was definitely the most disappointing book I read this year because I was so in love with Contagion and I was so keen for this book. It came out on my freaking birthday and it just disappointed me so much. So yeah, this one, I'll be keeping it because I have Contagion, but if it wasn't for Contagion, that book would be in my unhaul pile and gone. Actually, I lied, there is only 6 books. I can't count, apparently. So the next book is The Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan. This is the first book in the Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard series. I went into this with relatively low but also relatively high expectations because obviously it's Rick Riordan. Everyone raves about Rick Riordan and I was told, like, I've tried Percy Jackson and it just wasn't for me. I just couldn't get into it. It's too young, it was just too predictable, too all over the place. I just couldn't get into it and I didn't enjoy it. And someone's like, oh, you should try the Magnus Chase series, it's a lot better than Percy Jackson. And I was like, yeah, cool, right, I'll give it a go. And I found it at QBD. It was like $5 for a hardcover or something ridiculous like that. It was like on like a crazy sale. So I picked it up and I was really keen to start it, and then it was just average. Like average. Yeah, it was definitely a disappointment. It wasn't necessarily a worst book, but it definitely was one of my lowest rated books this year. And I just didn't care. Like, it's so predictable, even though these people are older than the characters in Percy Jackson. It reads like a freaking middle grade book, which just annoys me. Like, the characters were so immature and irritating and it was so predictable and it was so all over the place. If this had been marketed as a middle grade, then it probably wouldn't have been as bad because it definitely read as a middle grade, even though these characters are like 17, 18 or 16, something around those lines. So they're YA age characters, and this is labeled as a YA book in bookstores and on GOODREADS, but it definitely was freaking middle grade. Just the way it's written, the way the characters are perceived, it's just, yeah, I just could not get into it. Rick Riordan I don't think is the author for me. It's like Cassandra Clare and those other really popular ones, they're just not authors for me. I think I'm just gonna not bother because I've been disappointed by every book I've read by them. So yeah, but that one was definitely a disappointing read, a bad read, not a fan whatsoever. Next we have Wicked Fox by Kat Chow, I think. This one I was super keen for. It sounds awesome. You're following this girl who's a seven-tailed fox and it's Korean mythology. Am I right? I think I've reviewed Wicked Fox, so I'll leave it linked down below. But this one was just super disappointing. I went into it with relatively high expectations and I expected to really enjoy it based on the synopsis and the whole idea of it, but it was just plain, it was boring, it was somewhat predictable. The characters were irritating, the romance was average. Yeah, it was just disappointing. It wasn't necessarily bad, and I know there is people out there that like it, but I feel like a majority of people, it seems, disliked this book. Like, it was a disappointment to them, but there is some people that enjoyed it. But yeah, it just wasn't for me. But I was super keen for it, like this Korean story based on like mythology with a seven-tailed fox, and I was just like, yes, this is gonna be awesome. It sounds freaking badass. It just wasn't. It was, yeah, it was just average. And the last book on this list is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This one was another disappointing book. Most of these books on this list were disappointing except for like The Mistletoe Murder, which I suppose it was somewhat disappointing, but it was also just a bad book. But Wilder Girls was definitely a disappointment because the premise sounded freaking awesome. Like, these kids are stuck at this school that's on an island and these weird things start happening to them, and it sounded freaking awesome, but the execution was just not there. It was boring, it was somewhat predictable, the main character was annoying, but I think she was meant to be annoying, but she was just slightly annoying. It wasn't even to the point where you're like, yes, this is an unlikable character. It's just like, this bitch is annoying. And the story was somewhat all over the place. I'm pretty sure I have reviewed this, so will leave it linked down below. But I just went into it, not even with high expectations, but I just expected it was going to be a book that I would enjoy. Not even love, but I would enjoy it. And it was just not. Like, and it's one of those books that you read and then you forget everything about it as soon as you've like closed the last page. You're like, wait, what the fuck just happened? Like, I don't even remember. I just finished it and I don't even remember what happened. It was, yeah, it was just average at best. I know there is people out there that really enjoy it, but I feel like this is another one where I've heard a lot of negative, like a lot of disappointing reviews. So, I don't know. Ooh, I just looked at my camera and it is like that far from going off the edge of the table. But yeah, so those were all the books that were disappointing to me for this year. Mostly disappointing. Mistletoe Murders was just fucking average. But yeah, they were my probably lowest rated books of the year. So yeah, that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you enjoyed any of these books or if you disliked any of these books and you agree with me. Please let me know in the comments. I'd love to have a chat. But yeah, that is it for now, and I will see you guys in the next video.